Good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending where you are in the world. This is Jason Clark. I'm one of the co-founders here at Crank Software, and I will be doing the opening part of this presentation, and then I'll hand it over to Aaron from our graphics team, who will walk through some animation building different scenarios and sort of show you a little more live of what Storyboard can do as far as animations. So, just to set the playing field, the issues we're seeing inside the embedded space and other markets is there's a lot greater expectations on user interfaces these days than there ever have been, and that's really just that the mobile market is pushing so fast and setting the expectations so high that the rest of the market needs to follow and get in line. Users, no matter what they're using now, are expecting that same amount of responsiveness, motion, and usability that they see inside their mobile phones, no matter what they're using. They don't understand that an embedded system isn't the same as a mobile phone. But what they really like about these user interfaces they're using on their phone is the amount of motion. It really does give a lot of feedback, responsiveness, and really lets them understand what's going on, but also gets them a lot more pleasure, eye candy, and what's happening. So this animations, and we're seeing it all over the place, that regardless of the device you're making, whether it is a mobile app game, but even if it's a car dashboard, a medical device, something on the factory floor, some level of animation helps the users, but also makes the user interface feel a lot more richer and capable. So that's all great that it's pushing the user interfaces, but this is a large issue for the embedded system manufacturers. And this is because they are not dealing with the same systems that are being built with the phones. The phones are using the bleeding edge of the sort of embedded processors, where most of the market is way behind that. Some of them may have a GPU and be able to use the OpenGLES acceleration that's available, but it may not even be at the same quality that's on their cell phones, the same amount of memory. But also many of the people using this are using just software render or some advanced 2D APIs that they have to sort of work with. And at the same time, and this is because the bill of materials isn't quite the same. When you're just making a small screen that's going to fit on the front of your stove or on a printer, how much money and investment you can put into that screen and UI is nowhere near comparable to what's going into the cell phones. So the budget is nowhere near the same. The bill of materials is a fraction, and the development teams, you don't have Apple's resources working on your product. You probably have a much smaller team, varying in size from 1 to, probably as high as 10, 20 people. So it is a lot. There's a big discrepancy between the amount of resources thrown at making these, but regardless of that, the expectations from the users don't vary. The users still evaluate based on their phone. When they touch an interface, they don't have that knowledge in there to say, oh, they're probably using a cheaper level LCD and processor that made it feasible to hit their bill of materials costs, so I should not feel that this is this gives me the same behavior because I'm okay with it. They don't level set to what you created, so they still need to understand that. But despite that, animations can still fit into your UI. You just need to contain them a little more. And a lot of people think just because they're using something that doesn't have a GPU that they have to ignore the ability to use animations. And that's not, it's not correct. It's just you need to be a little more careful, a little more knowledgeable about your animations, and use them sort of a little more particular. So I do have here just an example just to show people, what that could look like. So This is an MCU board, so this is an STM32, but we can run these same demos on small boards and everything. And hopefully this comes through on WebEx because you won't get the same frame rates. But if you go to Crank Software's YouTube channel, you can see this video there. But you can see here, even on a smaller system, animations that are sort of giving a rich feel to the UI are still available. And you don't have to say, just because I'm using these smaller platforms for embedded and I don't have a 3D GPU, that I can't have animations at all. We'll just jump back here to our slideshow. But one of the nice things about the cell phone or mobile industry leading this sort of conversation or this push for motion and animations in UIs is that they're also creating standards at the same time, and they're a great thing to pull from. And one of the good ones that we've seen recently is Google's material design. They have a large section on motion and how you should use it, and it does bring back to sort of the idea of what you would want to do inside of a embedded device, because most embedded devices have much more function. You know, you're not playing Angry Birds on these devices. You need to actually accomplish something real. The users are trying to get through it quickly, but that doesn't mean animations cannot be useful in a functional way. So the important things, remember, when you're doing animations, and you can see, and I'll show you this in a second, is make sure it's responsive. You know, that's the first thing people look for when they're using UI. It has to be responsive. They want immediate feedback. And animations can be great for that. When I press a button, something pops, something happens, so I know that something occurred at that moment. You've all used web pages where you hit a button to submit and you don't know whether anything happened because it's just stalled. Well, you really need to make sure you have a responsive UI. A natural feel to it, having easing and things moving a little more like how they do in real life with, you know, an easing in and easing out is always helpful. Your animations should have purpose, especially when you're doing sort of an embedded device. You know, there should be, you know, you're not just trying to have animations of things flying around in the background for no reason. But your animations are there to sort of drive the user through an experience and take them sort of through the UI. And this also eases the sort of the user's sort of feedback on the device and helps them follow their focus through the device and sort of know where to go and hopefully not get lost while sort of going through your menu system. So Aaron will actually show some examples of that. This web link I put up here does sort of talk through some of these things and gives a lot of good examples. So I do recommend that everybody takes a look at it. And, you know, a lot of these things can be applicable right back to the embedded systems, and a lot of these ideas and concepts can be used directly. The other nice thing about using a lot of the sort of ideas on the cell phone is, as I said, everybody's trying to sort of chase that. You know, there's so many times I go in to talk to a customer about they want their UI, and it's not long before they say, it needs to feel like an iPhone, or it needs to look like this, or it needs to have that. And they always reference their phone as an example. So inside of here, you can actually just seal the sort of look and the pop on the buttons that they use, and they sort of walk through how they do that. And there's lots of great examples on UI, and I'll just show one quickly. Like here, they're showing how to use animations to be very clear in their motion and drive you to. So here's the example of one animation and the other one where they come in nicely, but one sort of drives where you're looking and where you're going very nicely, where the other one sort of causes confusion. So there's lots of nice, clear examples there, and it's good to sort of review when you're making a UI and how to add motion to it. The other part of adding UI, sort of motion to your UI that we always have to address is not just the capabilities of the hardware and what you can do. It's actually the design and how you can actually bring this design concepts into the sort of design into your product workflow. So, you know, somebody has to come up with this motion, how it's going to move, how it's going to flow, and how it's going to give a nice, clean user experience. Here at Crank Software, we're firm believers that to do that, you need the designers and engineers to work together to sort of realize the true vision of what your UI wants to be. So keeping the designers involved throughout the entire development process is the way we ensure this isn't compromised. Once a system sort of goes back and forth too much, it causes a lot of iteration. So when somebody comes up with an animation, a designer may have told them how to do the animation, they did it on their desktop and using something like Flash or whatever they might have used. The engineers sort of take their interpretation of that, they're going to develop it with code, and at the end of the day we find that usually what happens is it was an interpretation of what they said, and they did things that were best for the engineers. They did some things that were best for the code, best for, reducing the lines of code they had to write, keeping their code clean, whatever it might be, memory usage. But they sort of compromise the user experience, and then you end up in a back and forth, which is very time taxing when you're trying to get a product out the door. And so this compromise of going back and forth is really what we see hurting products and making them go to market with a inferior UI than they had initially anticipated. So Storyboard, we have done a lot of work to take the concept, so as I said before, we believe that the designer and the engineers need to be able to work together. They need to be able to speak the same language and sort of have some common ground. So what we have done is made Storyboard that common ground. And we have worked to make sure that the designer can stay involved and in control of the UI throughout the entire product development. And not just be involved at the very beginning, but be able to control the UI and make sure that the true vision is realized. And to do that, we've had to make sure in a lot of different areas that the designer can be involved. So this made us step back and take a look at the entire development process and how this could work. A lot of people and competition and others, they always say they can involve designers, but maybe they just import a Photoshop file or they can pull in some assets, and maybe the designer can sort of drag a couple things around, but anything real they can't do. We have gone that extra step to make sure they can do almost everything. Starting with how they bring their content in, we can pull in Photoshop files, but we've even gone the extra step because everybody knows the second you look at a UI, it's probably going to change. The second someone sees it on the screen and feedback starts coming in, there's going to be iteration. So we went that extra step and made sure that we can re-import Photoshop files and actually pull in the differences between the Photoshop files as they iterate. We made sure that we had a familiar interface, so when they pull in the Photoshop files, the menu structure and the tree structures are identical. The animation timeline is imperative to this. And this is where we're going to dive into deeper today. Drag and drop, making sure you have a nice, clean, simple architecture that either a designer or an engineer is very clear as to what happens and when it happens and why it happens. We've added the ability to do scripting callouts to make sure, if you have a designer who is comfortable writing scripts, that they can actually go that extra level of UI logic and apply that. And a big one is the collaboration. The idea of having designers work on an embedded system with the engineers building it. This all falls apart if the designers can't actually share what they've done and commit it into the standard methods that the engineering team is controlling their product going out the door, which is usually some kind of code repository. But we had to make sure that we can actually do a compare and merge of our user interface at a graphical level, a tree level, and actually show all the changes and differences between different versions and allow you to compare and merge them. Whether it's an animation timeline, changes to the screen, changes to alpha values, whatever it might be, they all show up, and either an engineer or a designer can actually support that merge. And the last thing is making sure that you can support actually seeing the real app run with our real engine, whether it's on the desktop, a mobile device, or the embedded target directly. So diving down into the animation features, what we've done here is, we've provided a timeline, much like our users would, any of the designers coming into this would see when using other similar products that they used in the past, whether it's After Effects, Flash, whatever it might be. They can put the properties directly on the timeline, apply them. We have screen recording, allowing you to do keyframes. We can auto-create reverse animations. Any property can be put on the timeline, so whether it's a text change, a size change, alpha, 3D rotations, even uniforms pulled directly from shaders on our 3D platforms. It's all available along with a 3D along with an animation preview. And in our last version that we released a little while ago, we actually managed to add FBX animation importing, so pulling the animations directly from the FBX files when you're doing multi-mesh 3D models and putting them on our animation timelines. And Aaron will show you an example of this a little bit later on. So I'm just going to show you a very quick example of the power that we have seen when allowing our designers to do this kind of work and activity inside of our products. So this is a sample we built up for Embedded World this past year. And this was completely built by Aaron, one of our designers, who is not coming from an embedded space at all, but he understands 2D graphics, 3D graphics, and animations. So he was actually able to build this very rich user interface for a theater kiosk as a demo for our platform. So here's this product, this UI in Storyboard, and I'll just simulate it here to walk you through what happens inside of here. So this UI actually shows 2D and 3D coming together. Oops. If you don't push outside the window and change focus. A lot of rich animations, even when sitting still, start happening. If I click the screen, the animations all come forward and drive you through the presentation. Every screen drives the user's focus to where it should be and what they need to do. Every button click is responsive and has some animation to sort of show the responsiveness and, you know, what's going on, and allows them to see that things are changing and happening. And then we also, you can see here where we start bringing in 3D content and overlaying 2D, you know, all within a nice view that the users can see. Hopefully, these animations are coming through to you guys. The problem with doing an animation webinar on WebEx is WebEx drives a frame rate that is not in line with the 60 frames per second animations that we're doing here, but, you know, hopefully you're getting the general gist of what's going on. And the big part here is what I want to show is here's our animation timeline, and these are the type of in-depth animations you start seeing when you start enabling the designers to control the UI. So this is the screen being built up. This would be a lot of code to write. This would be a lot of work to iterate through this animation to start changing all the pieces. If I pull this up in our preview, you can see every little piece pops and has a little bit. Every circle grows a bit, and we can step through it frame by frame, but you can see the true power of what's inside of there when you actually give the designer sort of the ability to control every part of the screen, every step, and not try and do it. If this was done through code, they probably would have taken big blocks and just faded them in and not gone through the detail that you can actually see here. And that detail is really what gives this UI such a rich and powerful feel. So let me jump back to our PowerPoint here, and so that's it for me. I just wanted to walk through and show you where Storyboard's coming from and how we're looking at this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this over to Aaron, and Aaron's going to walk through a bunch of samples, pulling some of the stuff from the material designs, and sort of building up some UI examples that you can actually, you know, try yourself afterwards if you want. So without further ado, here's Aaron.
Hello guys. So as Jason had introduced me, I do a lot of the animations, and I want to always make a screen feel alive and like it's something the person is actually pressing. So much like the phones, we are trying to give some feedback to the user, and I'll just quickly simulate this application that I built up here in Storyboard, and we'll go through some of the buttons, some of the problems that it will have, and some of the ways we can fix these common issues that people see with animations. So first is just a standard button press. You press down, it changes state, and you release, it changes state again. Problem with this is when the person is pressing on that button, their finger is usually covering up the button. And once they release, well, it immediately goes back to the other state, and the user has no real knowledge that the button actually did anything. Next, we can just do a nice little screen. Well, it just goes to the next screen, the navigation has moved, and the user has no knowledge of why that navigation moved to what the place it is in now. So we can easily make a screen transition inside Storyboard to make sure that the user has knowledge of where the navigation now is. Lastly, we just have a nice menu opening. And while this has some animation already in it, it doesn't have enough animation to cohesively tell the user that each of these buttons does something separate. It just thinks like all these 4 buttons are the same because they all came up at the same time. So first, we're going to go into our storyboard application right here. And as you can see, there's a nice little model view here on the left. That you can see where everything in your application is. We're going to want to work on this button O2 group over here. Now, the reason this isn't a group is because it allows us to have more control and a more complex button that will give the user some feedback to the press that they will give and some more rich animation inside that. So first, what we want to do with this button is create the control that will be animated across it. So to do this, we'll just be right-clicking on this and creating a circle. This circle will expand as the person presses on it. This will allow the person to give some feedback that this is where they pressed on the screen. Next, the button will fade in and out of their press states, and this will give some feedback to the user that this button was pressed. So without further ado, I will add in a control that will give it a circle. The control name will be overlay, and I'll put in a circle. Next, you can see the circle is right there on top of the button. So we'll want to make sure the circle is over top of the whole button. To do this, we're just going to set up the position of it, and I have some values that work here. So the X will be 12, the Y will be 4, the width and height will be 90 and 37 respectively. We'll want to have a nice white fade in, so that will be easy to do. We'll just change the color to white. Next, what we want to do is just align it in the middle, and we'll start setting up our variables that we will animate. So to do this, we can just set up any of our properties with these unlets on the side to animate, so to have a variable that we can animate. So we'll want to animate the alpha of it fading in and out, and we'll also want to animate the size of it, so the width and the height down here. So to do this, we'll just click on this attribute, add a new variable, and type in the variable name of alpha. Press OK, and now you can see there's some feedback that we have a variable attached to the alpha right here. Next, what we'll want is to control the width and the height of this circle so it grows as we press on it. To do that, we'll just add another new variable and name it radius. Finish up that, press OK. Now we can use the same variable on multiple parts of the render extension, and because this circle will be growing at the same rate, both width and height, we can just use the exact same variable again. Have a radius there, press OK, and now you can see it's tied to both the width and the height. Now we'll just hide this because we don't need this until the animation is started. Next, what we'll want to do is we already have an alpha variable set up for our background of the press state of this button. And as you can see, there are multiple render extensions on this inside the properties view. But it also is controlled by the exact same alpha variable. And this is done so it keeps the animation editor clean when we're working with larger animations. With a small button press, this won't be a huge deal, but when you get into larger animations with screen-to-screen transitions, this can get a bit overbearing to the user and to the actual person designing this. So next, what we'll want to do is create the animation for this button. So to do this, we'll go view our list of animations, and here you can see our list of animations. We already have one. That was the animation you saw for the button of the menu opening. To create a new animation, you can just right-click and add an animation. We'll name this one Button Press, and leave it at 60 frames a second, which is a standard frame rate for all these embedded systems. So we'll go into here, and now we have a nice empty animation to start working with. So we'll want to start adding in steps. First, what we'll want to do is unhide that circle of the press and make it grow. So first, we'll want to unhide it. We'll add an animation step by right-clicking and adding an animation step, and finding in our animation that we want, or variable that we want animated. As you can see, we now have a step in the animation. So we'll want to unhide this first. So we'll just go press on the animation step, and under our properties, we'll just unhide it. Next, what we'll want to do is add in our overlay of it fading in. So to do this, we'll right-click on the animation step, and now, because we right-clicked on the animation step, it remembers where that animation step is from and allows us to quickly select our next variable that we want. So we'll press OK on that, And as you can see, it is added in at default 500 milliseconds. This works perfectly fine for us because we will be changing this later on. So because we want it to be pressed, we want it to fade in and out pretty quickly. We want it to fade in quicker than it fades out, just because a person usually presses quicker than he lifts his finger. This will just give a bit more feedback and it looks nicer. So to start animating it from 0 to 255 alpha, we will start and just inline double click on the value, press 0, and we'll want it to animate up to about 150, which is about half opacity. We also want the time to go down to about 200 milliseconds. So right now it's animating in, but it won't animate back out into 0 alpha and allow it to have a nice fade out. So to do this, we'll just double click behind it, and it'll add in another animation step for us using the values of the previous animation endpoint. So all we have to do is double click on the last value, animate to 0, and we want this to be a bit slower, so double click on the duration, and add it to 300 milliseconds. Next, what we'll want to do is grow this animation. So I'll start zooming out so we can get more of our animation graph in here, and I'll right-click on this and add an animation step. We want to have a radius of it, press OK, and as you can see, it's added up in here. We can just drag and drop these across so they can just be in line with each other. We'll align them later to make sure they're all perfectly in line, but right now this works fine. We'll want this radius to grow from about 0 to 125. I know these values work, I've tweaked with them, but as you can see, you can just change values over and over again until it works, and it's quick and easy to do. So we'll want to grow from 0 to 125, and there we go. So now we're done with that overlay. We'll want to hide it again. We'll want to hide the overlay, and to do this, we will again just add in another animation step for our hidden variable, and double-click by double-clicking. It can automatically add in the endpoint, so we can just go into our properties view here and turn it on. Now we can select multiple animations and use our align tools up at the top to align the animations to one another. As we know that all of these animations are now aligned, we can just use the last animation that we wanted to endpoint at and align it to the right. This allows it to nicely be hidden and clean up the animation at the endpoint. So if the animation is stopped halfway through, it'll just clean it up at the very end and hide everything, so it keeps the UI nice and clean throughout the entirety of the animation and throughout the animation after the animation is done. Now we'll want to add in the button fading in and out. To do this, we can just, again, add an animation step, find our press background, and there's an alpha variable that we had added in there. We also want the hidden variable of that because we want to unhide it and hide it again. So we will just add in the hidden variable. Now as you see, it added it to the front of it, to the back of it, however we want it on the front. So we will just select our two animation steps we created, and using our align tools, we can just pop it back over to the left-hand side. Now we want this to fade in fully from 0 to 255, so that will be nothing to a full opacity. And then we will add in another animation step from going from 255 back down to 0. Lastly, all we want to do is using our hidden variable, just hide it again. To make sure this happens, we will just double-click to add the step, hide it, check both of these steps, and using our align tools, we'll make sure that they can go across and be in the proper positions. Now we want to make sure that this is unhidden first, so with our variable, we'll just go into our properties window again, and checking off, we will make sure that this is unhidden. So this is just a quick animation of the button press. It didn't take too long to create, and as you can see, everything is nicely self-contained within this animation. Next, what we'll want to do is just attach this to the button. So we have our button group here, as we know from before. So what we want to do is on an action of a press, we will add an action by right-clicking, and we'll select a press event. So when the user will press this button, we'll want this animation to fire. So we'll use a press event and an animation, and we will fire the button press animation that we have created. We'll press finish, and as you can see, there's now an animation of a button press on there. So there's two added right now, and we'll get rid of one of them. Using our simulation, we can now see that there is a button there, and when we press it, it animates. Now, this might not be coming through for you perfectly because of the WebEx frame rates, but it's coming through at 60 frames a second. As you can see, there's a nice circle growing out from the button of where they pressed it, and this allows the user to say, hey, this is where I pressed on the screen, and the button is reacting to it, saying, hey, this is the button reacting to it, and the system reacting to the user's press. This gives some feedback to the user that will allow them to give some knowledge of, hey, this is where I pressed, this is the button doing something, and the user has had something happen to it. But right now, it's a bit slow. So we want to give the user a bit quicker of an animation, a bit more snappy of an animation, because the user gets annoyed at really long animations that they have to sit through just because the system told them to. So we can easily rescale up this animation. We'll just go back to our animation timeline, and inside our animation, we can use this Rescale Animation tool. Right now, we'll just scale it down to about 600 milliseconds, so about 60% of where it used to be. Now, press OK, and you can see the animation is now 600 milliseconds. Also, what we'll want to do is probably use this button animation multiple places on a screen and with multiple buttons. And you don't want to create the animation over and over and over again. So this is a useful tool for an animation. We can set a design context for this animation. So right now, the context of this button goes all the way up to the app level, inside the layer, inside the group. We only need this group to be the context of this animation, so we can copy and paste this group across multiple parts of the screen, and the animation will run the exact same. So to change the design context, we can just go under this design context dropdown, go under more model elements, and find our group that we want the context to be. We can select this group, press OK, and we will apply the new context to the existing steps. As you can see now, the variables reference the group level of it. So this will allow us to copy and paste this group with using Control-C and Control-V, moving it over, and we can change this text to anything different that we want. So we'll just select our text, and we can just inline edit it here to type something different. Now that we have that in there, we can just use the exact same animation as before. So as you see in our simulation right here, the button animation will work, and so will this different animation. They use the exact same animation, and using this design context, you can make templates of your buttons and just copy and paste them across the entire app. So this is very easy and very useful to create your button animations throughout the entire app, and you can do it quickly. It's a very simple animation. It gives the user feedback, much more so than just a standard up-down state, because there is some feedback of where the user pressed using this white circle overlay, and the feedback of the system saying, hey, I responded with the fade in and out slowly of that background press state. So next what we will do is work on this menu opening animation. Right now it opens too quickly, all at once, and the user has no knowledge of really what piece is which, and that there's actually 4 buttons that they can use. So we have an animation already set up for this one, and we can select our next animation by just coming to this drop-down and seeing our menu open. So as you see, this animation is a bit longer, but it's quite simple to see where all your variables are and what everything is happening. So what we want to happen with this menu animation is for each of these little smaller buttons to open up sequentially one at a time. So we'll just want to retime some of that animation by pulling over our steps, and we want them to come out about 100 milliseconds after one another. So to do this, we can easily just move over the pieces that we want to come over with us. So as you see, we'll want the first button, menu button 01, to come out immediately like it was already. However, we'll want to select these other 2 and just nudge these over by about 100 milliseconds. Now, what we want to do again is just nudge these next 2 100 milliseconds after that second one came out. So we can just nudge it over again by another 100 milliseconds. And lastly, just using basic control click to select multiple items and dragging the animation, we can just see how easy and useful it is just to be able to use our animation timeline to reorder an animation. Now, because this is a very iterative process, people don't really want to simulate every single time and run an animation every single time. So we have this preview animation button that will allow us to step through. So using this preview animation button, I can see what happened. Now, I already noticed that the initialization of these buttons aren't there. You can see the buttons popping up, and they're already kind of showing up before the animation even starts. So I can just, using the step tools, see this. What I'll want to do is go back into my animation timeline and initialize these variables to make sure that this doesn't happen. So I can just close this out, and by double-clicking, again, you can add in any step between two animation steps or between the beginning and the animation step next to it. This will have an animation going from the previous animation's value to the start of the next animation's value. I will double-click in, and it will add in a filled animation. And I can just double-click in these areas that I want the animation to be in. So I'll just use double-click to add in the animations of both these radiuses. And using control-click, you can just select multiple radiuses. And using the properties window on the right-hand side, you can change these values all at the same time. Next, what I'll do is preview the animation again. And as you can see with the step through, the animation is running properly. The values are initialized, and this makes sure that the menu opens up properly. So the reason to initialize the values is just in case the animation was left in a poor state before, well, you can nicely set up the animation to be in a better state before the animation even starts. This will allow it just so no matter where the animation left off, it'll always start at the right place, and the animation can still be running. As you can see, you can just step through it to make sure everything works the same way you wanted it to, and it'll work the same way in this animation preview as it will in the program. So if I simulate this, it works the exact same way. Next, what we'll want to do, after you see how you can easily iterate, is using our screen record animations, show how to create a nice screen-to-screen transition. Now, a lot of people might not want to work in this animation timeline. They might want to actually work in their actual workspace up here. And you can easily do this using our animation record. So what we'll want to do for our next animation is pressing on one of these buttons up here. We'll want to move over to the left-hand side of the screen and grow to be our new navigation, like you saw when I pressed on the Photos button to make it go to the next screen. So what I want to do is slide the links over to the left, grow it up fully, and you can do all of this just in here on the actual screen itself. To make sure of this, we'll just start toggling our record animation. And as you can see, a nice red bar comes across it. You see what you're doing, and you are now recording an animation. So what we'll want to do is just using the arrow keys, or even inputting a value up here in the Properties window, you can see that we can just set up what we want our animation to be. So I want to knock this button all the way over to the left, and do the same for the background. However, for the background, we'll want it to grow all the way across the screen, and I will set it to 800, which is the width of my screen. Next, that will be our first step of our animation. We'll want to grow the screen to make sure that it takes up the entirety of the screen. So to make a next frame of the animation, we can just take a snapshot of this frame, and now we are recording using animation frame 2. This will allow us to have a multiple-step animation still right here inside of our workspace. So what we want to do is make this button here on the left grow all the way across the top to the bottom of the screen. So we'll set the position to be 0, and the height will be 480, which is the height of our screen. We also want there to be a little bit of this background fill, this darker fill down at the bottom, to grow as well. Now we can easily, sure we can do it with all these regular variables, but now that we're inside a render extension, we can also just change any of these variables, and it'll automatically create a variable once the animation is snapshotted and finished. So we'll use that height there, and we'll just change it. Next, all we want to do is for this background, do the same thing of moving it all the way up to the top by setting it to 0, and the height to be 480, which is, again, the height of our app. So that will be our second step of our animation. Lastly, we just want a nice little bar over here to kind of differentiate our navigation from our main menu. To do this, we'll just take another snapshot of it, and we will find that fill that we have in our control right here. Finding that fill in that control, we can just set the variable here, and there we go. That will be our end frame and our last step of that animation. So we have done the recording inside of the workspace. Now we have to stop the recording, and this will create the animation. So this will be just an animation of our links press. We'll press OK, And as you can see here in the animation editor, an animation was created just for us. So we can, if we want to, change and control this animation after we have created it. But all we really want to do is just first preview this animation when we press on this links button. So to do that, we can even just press here inline in our editor, add an action, and on press, we'll have an animation and use our links press animation. We'll finish that, and now when we simulate our storyboard, you can see there is an actual animation that is going from screen to screen. So if you look at the difference between that animation and the photos animation, you can tell that the user can tell that the button moved and the navigation moved with it. In the first of the screen transitions, there is no real knowledge that the navigation moved, there's no real movement, and it just doesn't look as good. But with a quick little animation record that you can do directly inside Storyboard, you can see how much nicer and easier an animation and how much easier it is for the user to follow that animation to the next screen. So much like as you can just change these variables inside the animation timeline, inside 2D stuff and 2D components of your animation and of your UI, you can also do the same thing with 3D components. So right here, we have an FBX file inside FBX Review. This is just a standard FBX file exported from 3ds Max, and it has multiple animations inside the FBX file itself. So here's just a quick little preview of one of the animations that's inside this FBX file. Now we'll want that animation to be exactly the same inside of Storyboard, and we can do this. So if we go back into our Storyboard application, we can find our 3D file right here. This is the same 3D file. And as you see here in the FBX Review, these are all of the animations that are in this FBX file. To get these animations into Storyboard, all you have to do is under 3D model control, you'll see an import animation. You can import all of these animations by selecting all of them and using this arrow key to move them over to the right. When you press finish, all of the animations will show up here in your animation timeline. Now the nice thing about this is if you need to tweak an animation inside Storyboard, you can just come into this animation and all the values that were inside the FBX file are now inside of Storyboard itself. This animation will work the exact same way as any of the 2D animations. You can control the values of these objects inside this multi-mesh FBX file, and you can control them just the same preciseness that you would want to. If you just want to tweak something, you don't have to necessarily go back to the 3D artist to continuously over-iterate and iterate. So we'll want to actually see this animation run. So I'll just add a quick action on press, and we will see the animation run. I'll select one of these animations down, the roof coming off. And as you can see, there is an animation added to an action on press, and when we simulate this, the animation just runs. Again, you might not see it as easily because of WebEx's frame rate. However, it works just like that, in the exact same way that the FBX one would work. So that's how you can use the animation timeline for easier button presses, but still very necessary button presses. You can use them for a menu opening and just easily retiming your animations and reiterating over and over the animations, using the preview to make it easier for the designer to animate the same thing, kind of go back, iterate, animate again. And again, if you want to not just be inside the animation timeline and actually animate on the screen and on your workspace, you can use the record animation. And again, if you need to roll in a 3D model animation, you can do that using the FBX models, the FBX file format, and the import animation that we provide to the user and to the designer to use in terms of pulling in a 3D animation and just tweaking a 3D animation as everything goes into your animation timeline, being able to edit those values just the same way as you do any 2D stuff. So that's how you do any of those animations and some basic material animations themselves inside Storyboard. And I'll pass it back to Jason to answer any of the questions that you may have with the animations themselves.
Thanks, Aaron. Just going to come back here to sharing my desktop. I did forget to mention in our housekeeping up at the start that there is a Q&A box, so if you have questions, feel free to send them to us in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer any questions that come up. I think Aaron's examples there showed some pretty rich animations and how quickly and easily we can build them. The main part to take from this is by providing things that make designers feel at home inside of Storyboard, we are able to enable them to actually build richer and stronger UIs. And that's the most important part. You know, once they have control of everything, they can add that level of detail that you rarely get when you write it all in code. And it's really just for the simple reasons that all those iterations that Aaron was showing you, tweaking, it's taxing with writing that in code and doing it in other methods. So by providing a timeline, as I showed you earlier, you can actually have very rich animations. PowerPoint. So that's about all we had to talk about. But the main thing here is, just remember, the designer is very important in this process, but adding the animations is too, and also iteration. Iteration is the thing that sort of kills UIs throughout the entire process. Having to go back and forth, tweaking and tweening. And if this is going back between a design team and an engineering team, and the design team keeps asking for a small tweak just to see it, the engineering team has to implement it, flash it to a board, bring it back, allow them to see it. This can be a very taxing process. Storyboard really enables designers and engineers to sit together and develop a platform where they can both do and worry about their concerns. The engineers can be concerned about the plumbing in the back end. The designers are concerned about the movement and the look and feel. So if you aren't familiar with Crank software already, the Storyboard evaluation is available from our website. There is a free 30-day eval. There is lots of YouTube videos and everything up there to help you get through and see how to use us. And I'll start taking any questions that we have right now. So one of the questions here, are these demo apps available for download? So inside of Storyboard, there is a bunch of demo apps that show off different pieces. If you have your Storyboard installed, you can actually just say new Storyboard sample, and you'll get a list of demo applications that are available. The demo applications that Aaron showed today and what we did here, we can make them available. So if you're interested in that, just drop us an email. We are recording this session, so it will show up in our recorded webinar sessions afterwards, and we'll follow up with a link for everybody who's attended. So if you saw people come in and going out, so if you missed part of it, we will be able to send up a follow-up email with the webinar, and you can walk through it when timing is better for yourself. I have a question here about tweening. So Storyboard does allow you to tween the different animation timelines. So I'll come into Aaron's timelines here. So this is his original project. But when you click on any of the sections here, you can change the rate. So you can see here we can go to set rate, and there's linear, default rates of linear, ease in, ease out, and a bounce. And they're also up here. So when you editing the timeline, just so you know, there are two different views. Our properties view does come up with the animation step details where you can change things in the properties view, or you can change them in line directly in the bar. So we do provide a bunch of different tweening rates. We are in a future version planning to even make that more accessible to allow users to create their own custom tweens. But one thing that we sort of skipped over on this too, is that complete animation control is also available from our Lua scripting engine. So we do use Lua, if you're familiar with it. It's an open source scripting backend, and we do have our own ties into there. So you are able to control the animations directly inside of there, or just create a timer yourself, as many people do on HTML and JavaScript, and just trigger the timer and control the animation step by step inside of their own scripting code. So we do give this very nice interface here for creating your timelines. But, you know, when you're pulling from other applications too, sometimes you already have stuff or it's easier. We still allow all sort of your older methods or, you know, scripting backend methods to support the animations too. Frame rates. So I have a question here about how do I select the correct frame rate? So when you notice when Aaron was making all his animations, he was setting them to 60 frames a second, which that may be realistic or unrealistic for your platform depending on what you're doing. And you may not know until you actually try it on your system what your system's capable of. How we manage that here is a lot of times we'll run some benchmarking and see how fast a platform can do a full screen fade, how fast it can do a small animation, and a bunch of benchmarking applications we have so that we can get sort of the general basis of what that platform can do. And what's key here is that if we know a platform can only handle an animation of 20 frames a second, you know, ideally we'll feed that information back to our designer and say, when you're setting those frame rate values, you know, you should always come in and set them to be realistic for the platform. So you should come in and say the frame rate is 20 frames a second, you know. So that way when they're simulating, they will also see the correct frame rate, and when they're actually going through the preview, because if you come here to the preview, it'll show you each frame of this animation. Well, you know, it's good that they know that there's only 20 steps there's going to be in that. Well, this is a half-second animation, so there'll be 10 steps. So when they step frame by frame, rather than getting the number of steps you're seeing here, they'd only have 10 steps, and they'd actually see that maybe the animation looks chunky, and maybe I should sort of look back at how to manage that, because they're going to see exactly the frames per second on their desktop that you will see on the end target. I don't know if we have any more questions here. As I mentioned before, our eval is available on our website, and everything we've shown you here today is doable on your from the eval. It is a full version eval that you can download and provides you everything. So if you sign up for our evaluation, it is an immediate response, so you will get an email right away with a download link and a key. You don't have to wait for somebody to call you and verify you. You'll immediately get the download. Also, recently, we've opened up a new section on our website for demo images. So now if you wanted to just see on some of these things on your platforms, feel free to come in here and you can start coming in and looking at, if you have certain platforms available, you can come in and get demo images of all the different boards we have images posted for already. So here are some of the NXP ones. We have STM, Atmel boards, Renaissance, and TI are coming. So you can actually start seeing how rich of animations we can do on the platforms you're doing and sort of get a better idea and judgment of what you can accomplish with these platforms. So these are available for download more or less. For the most part, they're SD card downloads. You just simply copy it to an SD card and you can use it from there. Also, if you're looking for these webinars afterwards or want to see some of our previous webinars, under the webinar section here too, you can actually see here's today's webinar, but all the old ones are available on demand, so you can watch them immediately on your desktop. Anyways, thanks everybody. Thanks Aaron for showing off the timeline, and if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can call us, email us at info@cranksoftware.com, or we have forums available. Tweet us, do whatever you need to do. We have all the forms of communication open. Thanks, and have a good day.